Hello, everybody. Greetings from IGCP Group and Mankind Group. I am Dr. K. Agarwal. Welcome to our scientific feast, specifically in the early evening hours, the time when post-COVID patients are feeling fatigued. And we are going to talk and try to find out a solution for this post-COVID fatigue sickness present in 10 to 30% of the cases. You can call them as post-COVID, you can call them as long COVID. I started this terminology as post-COVID on the basis that after 9th day, COVID is no more infectious. People are now starting calling it as a long COVID. Will it enter and become a chronic fatigue syndrome? Will it end up into a carrier state of the virus? We don't know. As on today, everybody is working on it. There are speculations that in children with genetic disorder where carnitine is absent, their symptoms of carnitine deficiency mimics the post-COVID fatigue. And some people say that vitamin B12 deficiency symptoms, they mimic the symptoms of post-COVID. Another says that we are heading towards a chronic fatigue syndrome, which is a well-established subject which all of us have read. To discuss this, I have with me two experts. I have Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary. He is a MD and DM in Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine. He is a professor and head of Department of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine, University of Health Sciences, PGI, Rohtak. He is a president of Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine. And I also have with me Dr. B. Maheshwar, who is MD in Internal Medicine. He's a senior consultant physician and diabetologist, BKS Health Center in Hyderabad. Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary has extensive experience right from the start of managing patients with COVID. So is with Dr. B. Maheshwar. The sequence will be, I'll ask both of them initially to introduce the subject the way they want, and then we will interact with each other. So first of all, I'll present to you Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary.
Good evening, sir. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And I am a hardcore internist and then gone into pulmonary critical care as a subspecialty. So I am primarily, sir, I am in MD internal medicine. So I have been in medicine, and I think that today's.
I am also a internal medicine with an interest in cardiology, and now an interest in public health.
Yeah, same here. And that's how we have a spectrum which is pretty wide. But I think we are very focused on the people who are acutely sick, and then subsequently seeing what is happening to them in the follow-up. Unfortunately, the way the medicine has been compartmentalized, so people are seeing that's in acute setting, and then they're not able to follow it up. But as an internist and a critical care intensivist and pulmonologist, I'm that way fortunate enough to have a follow-up of these cases. I think, sir, when we are talking in terms of post-COVID, post-acute COVID, long COVID, there are different terminologies. Depending upon that, we have started seeing these patients coming up. And if you see, and I hope you will agree with me, is that this epidemic has been very fascinating from the public health perspective. First half was preparation, then was looking at probably public health perspective prevention, active case detection, which are the principles of medicine, of public health and infectious disease, by acute severe thing. And now we are putting our attention to what is happening to the people when the fire which was burning has been extinguished, or rather say still been smoldering in some of those cases. So it is these group of cases which have started coming up. And post-COVID aftermath, we are like started running now post-COVID clinic for last now 4 weeks. Regularly, we are running it up. But because of some specialty bias we are seeing, but on an average, if I go by word data, we have calculated in that till date in my state. If I go by a conservative estimate of 10% of the people having post-COVID symptoms, we will be seeing nearly 15,000 as of 2 days back. We had 153,000 cases in the state of Haryana. I think that is a conservative estimate. And if I go by the liberal estimate, which people are coming from the reports, though they again are highly selective. If I go by nearly 35 to 40%, then probably this number can jump up to 60,000. So it's a big number, big chunk, which as an internal medicine, as a general physicians, or we will be seeing it in different aspects, whether going to neuropsychiatric involvement, etc. But one thing which is very fascinating is, and I want to put it very clearly, is that we are talking about different things which have been associated, coming when somebody is talking of brain fog, another is talking mark fatigue, another is talking in terms of inability to concentrate, or people having muscle weakness taking time. I think this is not new. Probably we are trying to romanticize with this disease too much now. And it's not that the problem is not there, it is there. If you see it, we have been trying to say it for a long time, the intensive care people, about the post-sepsis syndrome. If you see the cases of a post-sepsis syndrome, practically what you are discussing today in COVID, chronic COVID, it is exactly the same. Critical care myoneuropathy is a known part, which is being followed up, and they take 6 months to 12 months to recover completely, and they still may not cover. Similarly, we are looking in terms of severe people who are on ventilators, otherwise because of other illnesses, facing the same issues which have been there. Therefore, I think, but I'm happy in one way that this has brought down the issue, and it is bringing up a new concept which people not as a chronic critical care and its follow-up. That's. I hope, Dr. Agarwal, you will agree with it. And that's exactly we are seeing. And obviously it is disabling. It creates to such an extent that people find it difficult to go back. Fatigue, tired. I myself had a COVID. Now, when I look back, it took me around about 6 to 8 weeks to back to my normal self. Like I used to walk pretty fast, and it took me 6 weeks or so to gradually go up, having tiredness in the legs or feeling a little bit uncomfortable. You feel like after a couple of hours or minutes of working, that's a 30, 40 minutes, you go and lie down, take rest. So I think that's there. And as a physician, we have been writing as a post-viral fatigue or post-viral, which will take over a point of time. So I think somewhere when we are talking in terms of pathophysiology, what I look at it's two components. Acute onset obviously is an acute organ dysfunction. Dominant effect has been on the lungs, but we now realize that cardiovascular involvement is nearly in 20-30% cases where we are seeing myocarditis, and biomarkers are telling us now much better than otherwise we would have been there. And simultaneously, we also are having additional something which is interesting to know is that the neurological complications, we are seeing it up, and the loss of smell, which has been there, is considered now to be a neurological symptom, rather local symptom. Now, when you start following up these cases, the studies which have come up from the JAMA Cardiology, though it was a highly selective group of patients, the pain chest discomfort, they found that 30% of these practically people are having myocardial dysfunction on magnetic resonance angiography. Now, when I start looking at it, why I'm saying we have forgotten musculoskeletal system. Heart is nothing else but is a muscle. Therefore, if I see the functions of the muscles, obviously we know it is extensively endothelial. It has an extensive involvement of a network of blood vessels. Same is true about the skeletal muscles, and they're all enriched in AC2 receptors. Therefore, when I start looking at it, probably if I do an extension of it, probably people have now the few case reports have come up where people have acute myositis also because of COVID, which recovered over a period of time. So when you start looking at fatigue and muscle dysfunction, which is a concept which are all interrelated, symptoms starts looking something like myalgic encephalomyelitis or fibromyalgia syndromes. But my own feeling is that it probably is a combination of direct effect of muscles, involvement in the disease, and then the remnants which are going on. Along with it, alternative, there's a double whammy is of cytokines which are coming and also affecting the muscles. And then the way the cell energy sources, that is the mitochondria in the cellular dysfunction takes place, that takes time to recover. And quite often they tend to shut it down so that like you try to use low energy and it's switching it on back will take time. Therefore, probably as we are talking today, sepsis in terms of cellular dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction, subcellular component, probably it has been inducing significant subcellular or a mitochondrial dysfunction. That means your energy production reduces. And that probably, along with the presence of a smoldering inflammation, does not allow to switch it off. And these symptoms persist in some number. This is how I have now started looking at it. It's a very simplistic explanation. But looking at it, the amount of cytokines, the amount of chemokines, and the chemical plus virological injuries taking place, I think we still need to quantify it. That's how I look at it. And we have to see how we can restore our cell functions back. And probably why we need today more studies where we can have cellular functions we see, muscle functions we see. And there have been 2 elegant reports which have come. People try to do biopsies in these cases, muscle biopsies, and they saw it. We all know that there will a straight strip, which you see in immunofluorescence. It has been broken down into multiple small fashions on immunofluorescence. That means cellular dysfunction is taking place in these patients, and we need to be aware. Acute setting, yes. Chronic debilitating, musculoskeletal system needs a lot of inputs, and fatigue cytokine, probably something similar we are seeing as on a chronic fatigue syndrome. But there we look at 6 months, the disease is only hardly, let me say, 9 to 10 months old. So we may not be, that's why we post-COVID, we have started talking about after 8 weeks. And acute COVID is between 3 weeks to 8 weeks. So prolonged. So that's why the definitions are evolving. Dynamics of disease is evolving. But I'm not surprised because that is what we have been seeing with other diseases. And another important component besides cognitive dysfunction is sleep disturbances, which are taking place with it.
So coming back to Dr. Maheshwar, I want to redefine what Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary has said. So let me say a virus has entered inside my body. It will cause viremia. It will cause viral dysfunction wherever it enters. It enters the brain, heart, wherever it enters. Wherever we have seen the presence of virus in a postmortem, will cause a direct viral effect on that particular organ. In the meantime, it also initiates its cytokine release. It will release locally TNF alpha, and systemically it will release IL-1 beta, IL-8, IL-18, and IL-6. With that, fibrinogen comes in. Now, after 8 weeks, now we will have 2 types of patients. One person will be normal cytokines. That means the C-reactive protein has returned back to normal levels. Now, these are the people who have no residual cytokine release in the body. That's one group. And the second group will be those who CRP is not returned to normal. CRP is on the higher side. So that means we are having 2 types of fatigue, 2 types of post-COVID symptoms. Those people who have no underlying cytokine as a reason, another who have a cytokine as a reason. Probably those who have a fatigue with normal CRP, the involvement is mitochondrial energy level depletion because of the viral effect. And those who have a positive CRP, they have persistent inflammation, persistent inflammatory pathology, their fatigue will be much higher. Can you comment on this, and then we come back to the treatment?
Yeah. Good evening, sir. Good evening, Agarwal, sir. Nice seeing you practically, because I'm an ardent follower of your e-media news, and I follow a lot of your journals or blogs which you write online. And I'm happy to hear that you are an ardent internist, because I am a physician by choice. Okay, because I had a chance to pursue the super specialty or subspecialty, but I just settled down as a general medicine practitioner because of my, you can say, madness for the subject, right? So, and thanks Dhruva Chaudhary sir. So it was like basic internal medicine class which I heard from you, because you elucidated all the mechanisms of post-COVID syndrome and the pathophysiology involved. But for the sake of viewers, I would like to add few points in relation to the definition and the classification part of the post-COVID. Actually, post-COVID, post-acute COVID syndrome or long COVID is defined as a multi-system disease, because as told by Dhruva sir and Agarwal sir, it is basically due to either a mitochondrial dysfunction or a cytokine release related damage. So it is basically extending beyond 3 weeks from the day of first symptoms appearance. And usually it is the post-COVID, post-acute COVID-19 patients are classified into two categories. So one who require extensive support from the critical care unit. So they are managed in hospital. And the other people, the majority of the people who recover from the acute COVID syndrome, they continue having extreme fatigue to the extent that they can't even, as Dhruva sir told, they can't even take steps or 10 steps at a go, and need to take rest in between. So debilitating will be the post-COVID syndrome. And the main feature in these people will be a fatigue, persistent cough, hoarseness of voice, and other symptoms, like exactly as Dhruva sir told, loss of smell is one of the features which is persisting for longer period, more than even 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks also it's persisting from the day first symptom onset. So in view of these persistence of these symptoms, these post-acute COVID syndrome needs to be addressed. So, and I'm happy that this Indian government has taken a good initiative. And since I think August, Agarwal sir, August 11th or so, they have started post-COVID centers in most of the government setups, as well as in the private setups in hospitals in India. So the mechanism is, as Dhruva sir told, it is basically due to mitochondrial dysfunction as well as the cytokine release related damage. So this is the thing. So actually we need to take a close watch of the post-COVID, post-acute COVID-19 patients, follow them up clinically, and most of them improve symptomatically on their own. But if there is something going wrong severely, like extreme breathing difficulty or extreme cough or extreme increase in the cytokines in relation to the ferritin, interleukin 6, LDH, and D-dimer levels, they may need, the minority of the patients may need in-hospital care. Rest of the patients usually fare well on an OP basis treatment. They can improve better. So, but we should be watchful about these minority of the people who may land up in any complications. So that's it, sir.
Coming back to Dr. Maheshwar, coming back to the treatment, I will come back to investigations later on.
Yes,
but
sir.
coming back to the treatment, let's have few of the situations.
Yes.
40% of the people may have small intestinal involvement. And it is ileum which is predominantly involved, because we do get inflammation in the appendix. Therefore, ileal absorption means B12. Small intestinal calcium, zinc, vitamin D, proteins. So we may have protein losing enteropathy. We may have vitamin B12 deficiency. Normally B12 deficiency takes some time, but folic acid deficiency can occur in 2 to 3 weeks time. Then we have mitochondrial dysfunction. And then we have a cardiac and muscular skeletal muscle mitochondrial involvement. So the options available with us are high protein diet, carnitine, then we have vitamin B12 supplementation, folic acid supplementation, correction of zinc deficiency, correction of vitamin D deficiency. So these are some of the answers for us to find out. I would like both of you by turn to give your opinion. how to choose them, which one to choose them? Is there any evidence for any one of them? Starting from Dr. Maheshwar to Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary.
So, that's an interesting question, sir, because in view of the short duration of the illness, so it's like less than a year from the COVID outbreak. So, because there is not much of evidence, research-based evidence, which suggests any pharmacological or non-pharmacological interventions which can improve these fatigue symptoms, especially. Rest of the symptoms we can manage symptomatically, like fever can be managed with the paracetamol or other NSAIDs. Cough can be managed with antihistamines and other things. But fatigue, in relation to the fatigue, as you rightly told, since the basis is mainly mitochondrial dysfunction, we can consider any supplementation with L-carnitine and B12 and folic acid supplementation, or can be suggested to most of the people. And as you rightly told, vitamin C and vitamin D supplementation also helps in coping up the symptoms of fatigue. And even most of the people will be vitamin D deficient because they will be staying indoors due to the fear of COVID, and most of the people nowadays are working from home, so they definitely or they tend to have higher chances of hypovitaminosis D. So these are all the logical options which we can have in the treatment of post-acute COVID-19 patients. So Dhruva, sir, so can you add something, sir?
You see, what Dr. Agarwal you have suggested, I think makes some sense. In terms of chronic fatigue syndrome, they have shown these deficiencies, and here we are seeing that there is an abundance of ACE2 receptors in the gut, and a lot of things which are happening is not only absorption, but I think what is very important is what if you say the dysbiosis microbiology. If you look at it, the microflora which was there, that also gets a significant change. So microbial dysbiosis is also taking place, and that probably, in addition to involvement, edema, etc., is responsible. So I think somewhere that is where the Ayurveda also comes into picture. Though I'm not aware too much where they start everything with the pitta, and a lot of now emphasis is going on today in terms of what are the bacterial overgrowth, bacterial dysfunctions, alterations which takes place. Therefore, to have deficiencies of these things, because if you really look at it, all these micro enzymes or these whether they're vitamins or your other things like L-carnitine, or they are required in or magnesium or your other parts of vitamin C, etc. They are basically or coenzyme Q. So they all act like intermediaries for metabolism, or they are needed for your enzymatic preparations. That's how, when you talk in terms of, again, I'm correlating with sepsis, because there we are now looking at as a microcirculatory mitochondrial dysfunction syndrome. Now here also, what we are saying is, probably it will be oversimplification that because of this there is a deficiency and hence they go it. I think probably already some amount of deficiencies around, and it gets further precipitated. And when you add to it significant amount of acute requirements which are there, they are not able to maintain it, then you start seeing probably a combination of these clinical features which we are there. I know it's a paradox, it's an oxymoron condition with us where we have vitamin D deficiency, plenty of sunshine and minimum of vitamin D. It's an epidemic going along. Same way, we got a couple of patients who had a vitamin C in sepsis, and otherwise also levels were low, probably less amount of taking of citrus or other fruits in the diet. So probably it goes back to the deficiencies are recorded, but definitive data in terms of COVID causing deficiency is still evolving. Still, we don't have that. We are extrapolating what people have seen work from chronic fatigue syndrome. And I think wherever you have a deficiencies, or where you have a genetic predispositions, or where you have not been able to switch off the inflammation, whatever may be the reasons for it, probably are the ones where we are seeing it. And looking at it, depending upon it, because one single deficiency will not be good enough. And we know that metabolic pathways are there, they act at multiple pathways. Some are working with the lipid peroxidation, some are working with your at other places. And L-carnitine, we know as such, because it's a theme here, but because it is the part and parcel required for metabolism for free fatty acids. So I think there is somewhere the requirements could be there. And that is one of the reasons why vitamin C is so importantly being prescribed, because it has been all propagated by Merck from the sepsis that you probably has like an acute scurvy-like condition, and hence we are giving, because it again requires a lot of intermediary pathways, especially to take care of reactive oxygen species, antioxidant. This is how vitamin C is working. Same is true for L-carnitine also, where you are seeing that it is working. We try to see ideally a ratio between free carnitine or acyl carnitine. That's how we look. Lower the ratio, better it is. So I think substrate is required, absorption adequate is required. We know gut involvement is there. So some amount of contribution we do expect. And now with the theory of a microbial dysbiosis coming up, which lead to like a bacterial overgrowth of various cocci, etc. So that leads on to problem. I think everything in the combination is working rather than a particular compound, if I look at from the evidence which is available to us as of now.
So before I go back to the protocols, because our job today is to build up a protocol for all those doctors who are viewing this program, they will definitely like to take a carry home message
Sure.
that what to do and what not to do. But before I do that, because Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary raised a concept of Ayurveda, so I'm going to slightly build up the Ayurvedic concept into this particular condition. In Ayurveda, when you have a fire in your body, so you have Pitta is the ingredient in that fire, Agni is the intensity of the fire, and Tej is the illumination. The resultant light and illumination is the Tej. So in our body, we have 7 different types of tissues: Rasa, Rakta, Mamsa, Medha, Maja, Asti, Shukra. And in that format, the tissues are formed. The first is plasma, then blood, and then muscle, then adipose tissue, then bone, bone marrow, and the immunity. That's how it is developed. Now, the areas where metabolism takes place in the body are 5. Now watch it. There are 5 areas which we call them as factories where metabolism takes place. There are 5. Alochak Pitta, which is the eye. Now you see eye is the center for COVID-19 inflammation. Then Bhrajak Pitta, which is the skin, and we see that skin manifestations occurred in post-COVID. Post-COVID, we have eye. Post-COVID, we have skin. And then we have Pachak Pitta, and that is esophagus, stomach, and small intestine. And that Pachak Pitta basically deals with COVID gastritis, COVID esophagitis, COVID mesenteric adenitis, COVID appendicitis, COVID ileitis. And then we have Ranjak Pitta, which involves the liver, gallbladder, and the blood. So we have cholecystitis, we have hepatic dysfunction, and we have low hemoglobin levels. And then it involves the Sadhak Pitta, which involves myocardial involvement. So if you see in the post-COVID phase, it is nothing but residual inflammation. When the virus is gone, it has ignited the residual inflammation, and that recurrent inflammation leads to the post-COVID phenomena. And that is evident by both mitochondrial dysfunction and by this. If you see the involvement of secretory factories in the body, there are 5 factories where the liquid component, gel department of our body is 5 locations. So we have in that 5, we have 5 different types, and we have Tarpak, and that is in the brain CSF, and we see hydrocephalus is not seen. We are seeing Avalambak, so pericardial effusion and pleural effusion are not seen. We see Schlesinger, so osteo joint involvement is not seen. So whatever Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary has said, it is right. It is the involvement of metabolism in Ayurveda, and it is the involvement of metabolism in modern system of medicine. So according to Ayurveda, there are 13 different types of metabolism pathways in the body. And these pathways in the body are basically affected because of the low-grade inflammation. And to take care of the low-grade inflammation, we can consider settling down the inflammation. B, we need to give them the fuel which has been impaired by the fire, and that involves giving them L-carnitine for the mitochondrial energy function, B12 for their symptomatology, their deficiencies, high protein diet, specifically soya, because soya reduces IL-6. It has a phytoestrogens, and we give them other supplements which you start doing it in the process, you carry them up. So coming back to Dhruva again, now I want to now convert. All of us have given our views. So I want to convert them in the form of a prescription. So let's come out with some consensus. A patient comes, a non-pregnant, non-elderly, young patient comes, and that means post-adolescent, between the age of 20 and 40 or 50. The patient says, I am having extreme degree of fatigue and I have recovered. I have post 10th day, my virus has become negative, but my weakness is persisting. My hemoglobin has dropped by 1 gram, which will be an average fall of hemoglobin. Urine does not show any nephropathy. Urine does not show presence of any traces. CRP is near back to normal, not normal, near back to normal. Some degree of inflammation is persistent. How will we treat him? Should I go for vitamin D level? Should I go for B12 levels? Or should I directly put him on to the treatment? Starting from Maheshwar and then to Dhruva. So I'm going picking up situation. How do I treat such a case?
Okay, it's an elderly patient, sir. So
No, between 20 years to 50 years.
20 to 50 years. Okay, yeah. Okay. Since no, actually, so it's better to get some B12 and D levels done, sir. Otherwise, based on the finances, so if the patient is not affordable, we can straight away start B12 and folic acid as well as levocarnitine combination treatment, as well as vitamin D and vitamin C supplements will help her. So because the hemoglobin drop is not significant, she may not get any help from the hematinics. So other supplemental agents may help her.
So do I give a cocktail, Dhruva, to everybody after 3 months if they are showing fatigue? That I say, now you take these 3 months, a cocktail of vitamins without doing any testing. You take a vitamin D 60,000 per month, you take folic acid 5 milligram per day, you take carnitine, you take levocarnitine, you take vitamin B12, and you take vitamin C and zinc. Do you think that we should?
See, I was listening to Dr. Maheshwar also. At 10, 15 days, I think I will not be jumping too much on it, because what I have realized is body has enough resilience to go back to it. That is one. So it doesn't mean that we have to write prescription for everything. That is one point. Secondly is when they are coming up, quite often you see post-viral fatigue. Yes, you will. My emphasis more than medicines will be on a good, nutritious, balanced diet, which gives me adequate amount of antioxidants, which gives me adequate amount of liquid. And along with that, I will tend to have a good amount of a rest. And finally, I will also ask whether they're getting adequate sleep or not. Because if you get adequate sleep, large amount of this inflammation, other things can also start settling down. So my prescription will be based on that, A. B, we are finding subclinical deficiencies are there. So that's how we look at it. The B complex and other groups, they do help us in this particular scenario. So you do give B complex with zinc already. By and large, they are coming 10th, 11th, 15th day. I'm just coming to that first. Is that all of now you will see a tons of prescriptions of CADAs, zinc, calcium, D, etc. So I think already by the time they come to you, already they actually their whole system is filled with it. But nevertheless, once you do it, I think it is extremely important, especially If somebody is having 3 or 4 problems, particularly fatigue, it is there. I think it's important for us to look at it, some amount of evaluation for persistence of inflammation, A. B, I will just look at it, the basic parameters, how they are doing, and if somebody has under comorbidities, whether they are adequately controlled or not. 3. And 4th, then we will look at it, how they are doing. And on the basis of that, probably we will add, and 4th will be the physical therapy. That is, we will be putting a lot of emphasis on graded exercises, graded physical activity, because one of the major component which is taking place and helping up beside drugs, etc. Because if you look at the data also, no single drug individual helps you more than 30 to 40%. No, nothing is uniformly working out. So it will be a holistic treatment which will be there, including some sessions of counseling, because what you need is, and we aware about it, that the stress alters, promotes inflammation, and there are a lot of apprehension, anxiety is there. Therefore, at the end of the 3 months, definitely I would like to look at it, any smoldering inflammation there, parameters there. Then I will think in terms on case-to-case basis. Okay, you need it, I prescribe to you.
I just want to add, Dr. Dhruva, that in cardiomyopathy, when we don't have any other treatment, those people who have idiopathic low ejection fraction cardiomyopathy, there we have been giving L-carnitine for years together.
That's true. That's true.
And in this condition also, if we pick up these cases and we do their sequential 24 hours interval, if we do their high sensitivity tropi, and if we see that there is evidence of subclinical, instead of doing an MRI, if we do evidence of subclinical myocardial involvement, maybe these are the patients who may end up another 3 to 6 months, we see a epidemic of cardiomyopathy.
Probably, I agree with you. And in fact, in our post-COVID clinic, we have started looking at, we have already got the CMR done in 2 patients. So I'm going on an evidence-based this thing, because the data is coming and people are trying to extrapolate from what they had earlier to COVID. That's what I'm talking about, the sepsis also. So if you really ask me in terms of L-carnitine, when we are discussing about it, I will not put every person on L-carnitine. I agree with you that I need to have some evidence, objective evidence of muscle injury leading on to release of these things in the blood. High sensitivity troponin is there, or you can look at the creatine kinase, particularly looking at the muscles besides your cardiac, this thing. They are the places we're using, and I know that large number of our colleagues, especially those who are dealing with the cardiac muscle disease, they are writing carnitine. And it was actually the drug primarily came with an idea of helping in the person with the refractory cardiac failure, and had been not universally effective. Sir, please correct me if I remember it's around 30 to 40% of the people around where it is effective in small subgroup of these patients, because long-term follow-up are showing. So there are 2 different ways to look at it. If I'm looking primarily as a fatigue, now primary fatigue is because of skeletal muscles, probably plus minus, but if it is because of cardiac dysfunction, you expect, or you are expecting some objective evidence of it, is the 2 stuff. Probably with the cardiac objective, one may be using it a little early. As far as the muscle, one will take some time, give them time to physiotherapy and work it out over 6 weeks or so. If they work out, they do well, I will not. But if they do not, then probably I will add. I will totally go by clinical discussion.
I want to add one more point before I now take Maheshwar's input.
Because these are evolving areas.
No, when we see some patients, a segment of the patient says that little bit walking precipitates tachycardia. We call them an inappropriate sinus tachycardia. Any type of an exertion, they say we are breathless, we have tachycardia, we are fatigued. We check there, a group of them will have a TSH and T3 low, both of them will be low. And we will label them as a subclinical thyroiditis. We take them out because subclinical thyroiditis also can manifest with the same things. Some people will have significant fall in hemoglobin, let them take them out. The rest of the people who have inappropriate sinus tachycardia, which is persisting in a post-COVID phase. I'm not talking about pre-COVID, during the COVID phase. Now, these are the people who probably need a sequential tropi testing. These are the people whom we say that tachycardia linked to future cardiomyopathy. We have a inappropriate sinus tachycardia linked to stress cardiomyopathy. I'm not talking about the apical cardiomyopathy in the future. So I personally feel is that all those people, so I'm dividing my clinical situation into a couple of situations, irrespective of age. If you have a inappropriate sinus tachycardia without orthostatic hypotension, I'm not talking autonomic dysfunction. I've done my RR variability, and that RR variability is normal. And I've checked for their thyroid function. Their thyroid functions are normal. Now, these are the patients where I either go for a proper sequential testing, cardiac MRI or echo. That's one group. Or I can put them on a combination of a B12 with L-carnitine. That's one group. The second group is I have an established cardiac involvement, and I expect these are the cases which may end up into cardiomyopathy. That's my second group. And my third group is patient has extreme degree of fatigue, not responding to anything. Instead of going into EMGs and other parameters, I may consider carnitine in them. B12, I would definitely like to consider in all patients who have GI symptoms, because if their small intestine ileum is involved, their B12 will become deficit. So I will give them a B12 and folic acid to all of them. I may not do vitamin D test because in any way today we are saying 60,000, give it to everybody. Zinc, I will continue in any way. People are now taking zinc before the infection, and they are taking zinc to even prevent a reinfection. So zinc may not be, whether we prescribe or not, patient will take zinc. Vitamin C patient will take, vitamin D patient will take. They will come back to say, Doctor Sahab, wo to hum le hi rahe hain uske saath mein. So ultimately, we have defined three conditions. One condition is inappropriate sinus tachycardia, unexplained. Can this be a subclinical myocarditis? B, established patients with cardiac involvement in terms of that they are high sensitivity, troponin I was positive and demonstrated to be high. And third is non-responding patients of fatigue. And with this, I will ask your final opinion before I take up the question from the viewers who are watching these programs. First, Maheshwar, and then Dhruva.
So regarding cardiac complications.
No, I'm saying about, are we right? Am I right in taking out three indications for carnitine and B12? We have to come back to a consensus. Now, these are the patients where giving carnitine, adding carnitine is justified. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, actually the classification, clinical classification based on the profile, cardiac profile and the markers. I think whatever you told, I totally agree with you, because if there is any, because the cardiac muscle, as we know, is mainly dependent on the fatty acids as a fuel. So whenever there is mitochondrial dysfunction, levocarnitine definitely plays a role in improving the cardiac conditions. So actually, if there is definitely a tropi elevation with any evidence of dysfunction, better to supplement them with the levocarnitine. I agree with you.
Yes, Dr. Dhruva.
Yeah. You see, as far as your third condition is concerned, there's no issues when person is not taking, you add it. B12, in any case, now we use and we realize now the oral therapy is good enough. There's no problem in adding mecobalamin, and it works it out across the board. And looking at a clinical deficiency, and I think you have put a lot of emphasis in terms of deficiency arising in subclinical setting or somewhere in the borderline is when they have a terminal ileum involvement because of the richness of ACE2 receptors there and their TART. So I think there is no differentiation as far as that part is concerned. The people who are having inappropriate tachycardia, I think we need to look at a little more carefully, because these are the patients. When you have a cardiac involvement, I think there is a case in terms of preventive or in terms of therapeutics. We are there, we can go with it. When we are talking in terms of inappropriate tachycardia, first and foremost, I would like to look at it. What is the lung function in these cases? Because that is very important for me. And we will see whether we are seeing now, last roughly 20% or to so nearly 1/3 of the cases which we have seen over now last 1 month over our clinics, where we are finding some amount of tachycardia or something of there, is that there is a drop in oxygenation over 6-minute walk test. I think in these cases, I will definitely first do 6-minute walk test. I would like to rule out any hypoxemia. Once I find out there is no drop in saturation of 3% or more of this thing, there is no resting tachycardia or there is no resting this thing, then definitely it's a case to look at underlying myocardial dysfunction. As far as the 6U thyroid syndrome is not unusual, sir, in these cases. Thyroiditis as such has not been described, but subclinical thyroiditis that one has seen now over a period of time. If somebody tells me a little bit of a pain in the neck and they're feeling low-grade fever or they're finding difficulty, at that point of time, I will do a thyroid evaluation. And if tenderness is there, to rule out thyroiditis. And for me, the best test actually for them is the technetium. But short of that, you can do an ultrasound and you can find out if clinically tenderness is there in the neck. I think that's an important post-viral for all cases. Now, then if you find disproportionate, now there are two options for it. Either you go for a documentation. If I find a TROP-I, as you very rightly said, it's a biomarker, but it does cost $1,000. So I think that's where you will look at it. And I'll also like to see in these cases a close follow-up than expected. L-carnitine, only I will add when I'm reasonably certain that these patients having some myocardial dysfunction or they're having some evidence of myocardial injury, either clinical or lab or in small subset where we are looking at it, because I'm sitting in a tertiary care center. So we get that way. So we have some now bias towards looking at getting contrast enhanced MR in these cases. Unless until echo we find there is some amount of generalized difficulties in terms of regional because of ejection fractions. If a young person comes 40%, 45, should they have it? So those are the groups which will pick up and evaluate and then go for it, and then go for the standard protocols which you try to treat or manage cases for myocarditis.
Just to add a couple of things, that what we are observing is we are observing a slight fall in TSH and T3 both from the baseline. And the constant finding we are getting is patients who TSH is less than 2. And earlier their TSH was 3 or 4. And we are finding a subgroup of if TSH is less than 2, even if it is within normal limits, we are finding they have some degree of inappropriate tachycardia. And all those patients who are on hypothyroidism, we are reducing their thyroid dose by some degree, number one. Number two, 6-minute walk test is something we always say that during and after, do your 6-minute walk test, 6 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening, once in 6 days. Look for 6 parameters. Look for the 6-minute walk distance. Look for breathlessness. Look for difficulty in talking, what happened to Amitabh Bachchan. And then you start looking for your SpO2 level, whether it drops or not. Check for the SpO2 temperature, because low-grade temperature in COVID may be exertional in nature. So look for these 6 parameters. And if these 6 parameters are there, you know that you are having a incipient or underlying early respiratory failure. So if there is no early incipient subclinical thyroiditis, if there is no subclinical respiratory failure, and if there is no other deficiencies, yes, go ahead. If there is an inappropriate tachycardia, go ahead with the testing with TROP-I, or you can consider a L-carnitine treatment and see the response. Jacob AV says everyone gets post-COVID fatigue, or only a few, 10 to 30%. Is it prevalent more in younger age groups or older age group? Is there any prevention? Dhruva, I'm going to do a rapid fire. question answers. So, is there any age difference in post-COVID?
Sir, in these cases, they are finding the data which has come up shows is the incidence is relatively higher among the elderly people. Vis-a-vis, it occurs across the spectrum, but within that spectrum, probably 50 plus, they're finding much more than the younger people. But it is far
Maheshwar,
more crippling in the younger.
yes. Maheshwar, how long does this fatigue may last?
There is no particular period, sir. It may last for few months also. So usually, if it is staying between 3 weeks to 3 months, it is called post-acute COVID. In some people, it may end up like CFS, like chronic fatigue syndrome. Because as is evident in post-viral fatigue leading to CFS, in case of SARS and MERS, there are in COVID also there are some cases which may extend up to months. So we cannot say all of this.
Dhruva, are there any contraindications for L-carnitine? This is A.A. Desai who is asking.
See,
this.
sir, in this case, particularly if somebody is on is having epilepsy, you need to look at the drugs which are there. That is one part. Secondly, along with when you're seeing an uncartine, quite a few people, let's say, if somebody is on protein what you call as a protease inhibitors, especially in patients who have got your HIV and all, there you need to be careful about drug interactions. And so then if you go beyond 2 grams, in these cases, quite a few of them also complain of diarrhea. So I think these are the few things you need to look at it when you're prescribing and following these cases. But especially if somebody has epilepsy, please, and is on valproate, that is one drug you have to be careful.
This is Suresh Kumar Subramaniam. He wants to talk about, is there any way we can recover loss of smell and loss of taste earlier than natural recovery?
As of now, I don't know. Most of the time, majority of the people will recover within 7 days or so, majority of it. And it can persist up to 2 to 3 weeks. It's primarily on a neurological basis. So I think, but as of now, at least I am not aware of it. Can it be recovered or not? On its own? Whosoever it is there in our follow-up, nearly, again, 25% of patients had it, especially youngsters, and they've practically all recovered.
Maheshwar, I'm 35-year-old. I lost smell and taste. It has not recovered for 4 months now. What do I do?
As of now, nothing can be done.
No, they are not dangerous symptoms, sir. Actually, it's like time heals, right? So that is the typical situation where we need to wait. So they are not life-threatening. Just we need to wait, and it recovers on its own most of the times.
But I will be careful because these are neurological symptoms, and sometimes they can tell you if they are not recovery, long-term neurological disturbances can happen. So I would like to look at it comprehensive higher mental function and all, so that people do not get clouding or cognitive disturbances.
Yeah, in those situations, there should be some add-on symptoms, sir, apart from the loss of smell.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I know. Yes, but somewhere you have to be careful because it is small subsection of these where they are, because disease is again evolving.
Correct.
Can Dhruva explain brain clouding and brain fogging, what people are talking about today?
Sir, this is what we used to see.
PTSD, and it's different from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
You see, post-traumatic stress disorder is basically, you can, it's the trauma which you have gone through, the anxiety which you have gone through. After that, when you come up, you find difficulties like you in concentration, etc. So there is a definitive indices which is there. Suppose you have like somebody, we are seeing a part of it as a PTSD in patients of COVID, or in more than COVID patients in their families actually, because they had got an intense psychological trauma or injury because they thought that the COVID diagnosis is that. So in those conditions, primarily the level of anxiety will be high. They will be, if they have to stay alone, they will find it difficult. They will be having sweating. They will be having a difficulty in concentrations, etc. But primarily, this is how we see, and they may have nightmares also. Looking at it, they may not be having a good quality sleep. So that's what we look at PTCD, and it is related with that element. When you start looking at a brain fogging, primarily we start looking at, it's like, I want to talk to you and suddenly I will forget what I have to do. I may have recent memory lapses, some amount of it, which recover over a period of time. And then cognitive impairment, it can happen. I give you my example. I never realized it's this thing. Suddenly I will speak and I will forget the name of an individual. No, 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 no. You start looking at it. Otherwise, it would have been considered as a feature of people getting Alzheimer's, or people maybe getting some amount of cognitive function. But over a period of time, you realize you recover. So I think there's a fundamental difference between two things.
Do you think that B12 deficiency could have been a factor?
It can. In fact, people are trying to tell that you avoid certain drugs, like we are using metformin, we are using other things. But subclinical B12 deficiencies definitely, Dr. Agarwal, can interfere in these things. And that is why you will see all neurotropic drugs, like people are talking of B1, B2, as well as along with folic acid and your B12. Probably nobody has done systematic study. Neither I can say yes, I can know, but yes, probably they might be contributing, may contribute it. I can't say beyond that.
So let me sum up and thank both our speakers, Dr. Dhruva Chaudhary and Dr. B. Maheshwar, for their excellent inputs in a subject which is new. But more and more research in this subject may give us answers for diseases like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia. These are neglected fields where people suffer lifelong. But now people have started talking about it, working on it. This COVID has also taught us a term called chronic mild inflammation in the body, a CRP of between 1 and 3, which we used to ignore, and we used to say that this is a part of your body. And now people have started talking about an anti-inflammatory lifestyle. Today we have learned that keep your vitamin D under normal, 60,000 units per month. Make sure you are not vitamin zinc deficient. That will also help you at multiple places. Either take it by sprouts or by supplementation. Make sure you are not vitamin C deficient, whether you take your Chyawanprash, whether you take amla, whether you take any source of tablets of vitamin C. Make sure you are not deficient in vitamin C. Make sure you are not deficient in B12, specifically if you are a vegetarian or a mockatarian. Mockatarian means predominantly vegetarian, or mauke pe kabhi mil gaya to non-veg kha liya. That these are called mockatarian. If you are predominantly a vegetarian and if you are not taking lots of sprouts, you may be vitamin B12 deficient, and you may need to take care that you are not. You need to be sure that you are not folic acid deficient, because in Indian diet, because of the pesticide and insecticide, we wash everything, and folic acid is a water soluble vitamin, and it is lost the way we are cooking the food today. So folic acid deficiency can develop within 2 to 3 weeks of a COVID sickness. And vitamin and folic acid and B12 goes hand in hand to each other. And then finally, you have to make sure that you are not having a mitochondrial dysfunction. So ask your doctor if you have a muscle weakness or inappropriate tachycardia. Ask your doctor or tell your patient, I'm suspecting a mitochondrial dysfunction in the cardiac muscle or in the skeletal muscle. Read about it. The more you read about it, you will be clearer about it. And then start suspecting cases which may have a mitochondrial dysfunction, where you will find a new role of L-carnitine, which we have been given in chronic fatigue syndrome, and we have been giving in cardiomyopathy. Remember that the future is going to be cardiac evaluation of these cases. Both cardiopulmonary evaluation is 6-minute walk test. If you say in a 6-minute walk test, your walk distance is less by 35 meters than before, and if you find that your oxygen desaturates, you know you need more evaluation. And whenever you want an evaluation in every part of the country, you will have some Dhruva Chaudhary or Maheshwar there to guide all of you, because if you feel you need a guidance, As a doctor, you need a guidance from your seniors. In every corner, you will find people who have huge experience of COVID-19. They may be able to guide you. That's all for today. Namaskar to everybody, and keep watching us with more and more such seminars. Thank you, and namaste to Dhruvaji and Maheshwar. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.
ऋतु बंद कर दो इसको. ऋतु लाइव को बंद करो. ऋतु.